My wolves kneel in a sea of blood and moonlight, their muzzles pressed to the cold earth of the courtyard. The metallic scent of it, his blood, fills the air, thick and final. Andrew stares up at me from the ground, his alpha strength nothing but a memory leaking into the soil. His eyes, once so possessive and warm, are wide with a terror he never thought to spare for me. My hand doesn't shake. The ancient power singing in my veins is colder than the winter wind. I am no longer the girl he discarded. I am the storm he failed to foresee. He chose a human over his mate. He never knew the truth. He never knew what he was truly throwing away. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It didn't start with blood. It started with a scent. The scent of rain-soaked earth and wild honeysuckle couldn't mask it. The sharp, cloying perfume of another woman on his skin. It hit me the moment Andrew stepped through the door of our cabin, a physical blow to the gut that stole my breath. I stood frozen in the kitchen, my fingers curled around the edge of the granite countertop, the ceramic mug of herbal tea I'd been warming for him suddenly scalding against my palm. I didn't drop it. I held on, letting the heat anchor me to the present, to this quiet, rustic room that was supposed to be our sanctuary. Sienna! His voice was a low rumble, the alpha tone even in casual greeting. He shrugged out of his leather jacket, hanging it by the door with a practiced ease that felt like a betrayal. He didn't look at me, not really. His gaze swept the room, checking his territory before finally landing on my face. "You're up late." The words were ordinary. The tension in the air was a live wire. I could see the faint, hectic glitter in his hazel eyes, the slight dishevelment of his usually perfect dark hair. He'd been running. Not in wolf form. I'd have felt that through the pack bonds, but running nonetheless. "I couldn't sleep," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. It was the truth. The baby, a tiny, fluttering presence low in my belly, had been restless. Or maybe it was me. Maybe some part of me, the part that wasn't just Andrew's pregnant Omega mate, had known he was out there, drenched in another's scent. "Where were you?" A flicker of something, irritation, guilt, passed over his sharp features. Pack business. Bradley. His beta and a man whose disdain for me was a quiet, constant hum in the background of pack life. He tolerated me because Andrew claimed me, but he never missed an opportunity to remind me, subtly or not, that I was weaker. Human, a liability. "At 2 in the morning, I asked, setting the mug down with a soft click. "And it involved perfume." Andrew went very still. The air thickened, charged with the subtle dominance he usually shielded me from. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything, Andrew. I'm stating a fact. You smell like her. Like Stella." Stella, the name hung between us, ugly and unavoidable. The human from the nearby town, the one who'd been accidentally brought into pack affairs during a border dispute months ago. The one with the laugh like wind chimes and eyes that followed Andrew with a devotion that made my wolf want to snarl. My wolf. The thought was a bitter joke. My wolf was a silent, dormant thing, a ghost of potential that had never fully manifested. To the pack, I was essentially human. An Omega by designation only, valued for my soothing presence, and now for the alpha air I carried. Then Andrew's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, and for a wild moment I thought he might reach for me, might try to explain it away. Instead, he stopped, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the hallway. "Stella had information about rogues near the eastern ridge. She was scared. I calmed her down. Calmed her down." The phrase was intimate, an alpha's compulsion, a flood of calming energy. It was something he did for me during my nightmares, a gentle wash of his power. The idea of him using it on her, while she looked up at him with those wide, admiring eyes. "You calmed her down so thoroughly her perfume is in your pores." The words were out, sharper than I intended, laced with a pain I couldn't hide. His command rolled over me, the alpha power in it making my knees weaken instinctively. A flush of shame followed the submission. This was the dynamic. He was the alpha. I questioned, he answered. Or he didn't. I won't be interrogated in my own home. My duty is to the pack's safety. Everything I do is for the pack. His eyes dropped pointedly to my stomach, still flat beneath my soft sweater, but known to both of us. The dismissal was clear. My insecurity was a distraction from his noble purpose. The perfume was a necessary casualty of duty. The knot in my chest tightened, a hard, cold ball of something that felt dangerously like grief. "Of course," I whispered, looking away, breaking the tense eye contact. The formal title slipped out. He flinched, just a tiny movement at the corner of his eye. He hated when I used it in private. It meant I was retreating behind walls he couldn't easily scale. He sighed, the sound weary, and finally closed the distance between us. His hand came up, his fingers brushing a strand of my auburn hair behind my ear. His touch was warm, but the scent of honeysuckle and rain that was uniquely his was now layered with Stella's sweet, floral perfume. "Don't be like that," he murmured, his voice softening. "You know you're my mate." "This," he gestured vaguely, encompassing the night, the scent, the distance. "It means nothing. You're carrying my child, our child." That he said it to reassure me, but the words landed like stones. "You're carrying my child. That bond is everything." As if the bond between us was secondary, contingent on the pregnancy. As if my value was now solely tied to the life growing inside me. I forced a nod, leaning into his touch for a moment, playing my part. The obedient, trusting mate. The scent of Stella was a nauseating counterpoint to his familiar warmth. "I'm tired," I said, which wasn't a lie. "Go to bed. I'll be in soon. I need to check the perimeter reports." He kissed my forehead, a chaste, absent-minded gesture, and turned away, already pulling his phone from his pocket. The conversation was over. The incident filed away. I was expected to let it go. I walked to our bedroom, each step heavy. The cabin was beautiful, a testament to Andrew's desire to give his human touch, made a slice of normalcy. Wood beams, a stone fireplace, windows that looked out onto the dense, pack-honed forest. It had felt like a dream once. Now, the walls felt like a very pretty cave. I changed for bed, the silence in the room pressing in on me. The baby fluttered again, a soft, insistent reminder. "I am here. We are here." I placed a hand over my stomach. "I know, little one," I whispered into the dark. "I know." Sleep was a distant country. I lay awake, listening to the distant sounds of the pack settling for the night, the faint howl of a sentry far away. I listened for Andrew's return, but he didn't come. The digital clock on the nightstand glowed for 17 a.m. when I finally heard the front door open and close again softly. He'd been out for over 2 hours, checking perimeter reports. With Stella, a hot tear escaped, tracing a path down my temple into my hair. I wiped it away angrily. This wasn't me. I wasn't this weak, weeping creature. I had been strong before him. I had built a life. But he'd been the sun. And I, like a foolish flower, had turned my face to him and forgotten how to grow on my own. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly. Andrew was already gone, a note on the kitchen counter scrawled in his decisive handwriting, "Meeting with the elders all day. James will bring supplies. Stay inside, the weather is turning. Stay inside." Another gentle command. For my safety, of course. James, Andrew's gamma, and one of the few pack members whose kindness felt genuine, arrived just after noon. He was a bear of a man with a gentle smile, his arms laden with grocery bags and a stack of firewood. "Sienna, you look pale. Are you feeling all right?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern as he stomped the rain off his boots in the doorway. "Just the lack of sun, James. Thank you for this." I helped him unpack, grateful for the company. It's no trouble. Andrew's tied up with, well, you know how the elders are, endless debates about tradition. He shot me a careful look. He cares for you deeply. This rogue activity has him on edge. Rogue activity? I asked, my hands pausing on a can of soup. James looked momentarily flustered, as if he'd said too much. Just the usual nonsense, probably nothing, but Andrew takes every threat seriously. He changed the subject quickly, asking about the baby, about the book I was reading. After he left, the cabin felt emptier than before. Rogue activity. Was that the information Stella had, or was it a convenient excuse? The doubt was a poison, and Andrew had by late afternoon, the restlessness was a physical ache. The command to stay inside chafed. I needed air that wasn't filtered through the scent of my own doubt and his lingering perfume on the couch cushions. Pulling on a thick coat and boots, I slipped out the back door, into the misty veil of the forest. The pack lands were vast, but I knew the immediate trails well. The rain had softened to a fine drizzle, and the world was washed in shades of green and gray. For the first time all day, my shoulders began to unwind. Here, among the ancient pines and the damp, rich smell of the earth, I was just Sienna. Not the alpha's mate, not the vessel for the air, just me. I walked further than I intended, following a narrow deer path that wound down toward the sound of rushing water, Crystal Creek, which marked the eastern boundary of our territory. The roar of the water grew louder, a soothing white noise. That's when I heard them, voices carried on the wind cutting through the rush of the creek. One was Andrew's, low and intense. The other was a woman's, light, melodic. Stella. My feet rooted to the spongy ground. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to flee, to spare myself. But a colder, harder part of me, the part that had been born in the silence of last night's bedroom, pushed me forward, step by silent step, using the thick trunk of a cedar for cover. I peered through the dripping fronds of a fern. They stood on the bank of the swollen creek, about 50 yards downstream. Andrew had his back to me. Stella faced him, her blonde hair damp and clinging to her cheeks, her expression one of rapt attention. She reached out, placing a hand on his forearm. A casual, intimate gesture. I just get so scared out here alone, Andrew, she said, her voice carrying clearly. Knowing you're close, it's the only thing that makes me feel safe. You are safe, Andrew said, and his voice wasn't the hard alpha tone he'd used with me. It was gentle, protective. I've doubled the patrols. I won't let anything happen to you, Stella. I know you won't. She smiled up at him, a sun-breaking through clouds smile. It's different, you know. The way you protect, it's stronger, more real than anything I've ever known. Andrew didn't move away from her touch. He stood there, allowing it. You don't understand the weight of what it means to be protected by an alpha, he said, but there was no correction in his tone. It sounded almost like pride. Then help me understand, she breathed, taking a half-step closer. I want to understand your world, Andrew, all of it. I stopped breathing. The world narrowed to the space between their two bodies, to the acceptance on his posture. This wasn't a debriefing. This wasn't pack business. This was a moment, thick with something I recognized with devastating clarity. The beginning. Then Andrew's head lifted slightly. His shoulders tensed. He turned just a fraction, his gaze slicing through the mist and trees like a laser. He scented me, his eyes locked onto mine. Shock, then a flash of anger, then a mask of cold control settled over his features. Stella followed his gaze, her eyes widening when she saw me. She didn't step back. Her hand remained on Sienna, Andrew said, his voice cutting through the distance, no longer gentle. It was the voice of the alpha addressing a subordinate who had disobeyed. What are you doing out here? I told you to stay at the cabin. The cliff edge crumbled beneath my feet. All of it, the perfume, the late nights, the dismissal, coalesced into this single, brutal image. Him, choosing to stand with her touch upon him while he looked at me with icy reprimand. My voice, when it came, was a stranger's. Quiet, but it didn't shake. "It seems you were occupied. I didn't want to interrupt your understanding of pack protect." His eyes flashed with warning. "Go back to the cabin. Now, we will discuss this later." Stella finally let her hand drop, a small, smug smile playing on her lips before she composed her features into concern. "Andrew, maybe she's not feeling well. The pregnancy—" He didn't even look at her. His stare was fixed on me, a command in every line of his body. Submit, obey, retreat. For 3 years I had. I had bent to his will, to the pack's ways, believing my love and the life we were building were worth the slow erosion of myself. I looked at him, at the man who was my mate, my alpha, the father of my child. I looked at the human woman beside him, already standing in the space that was meant to be mine. I felt the fragile, fluttering life inside me, and for the first time I did not obey. I held his gaze. I didn't move. The rain fell between us, a cold, silent curtain. "No," I said, the word barely more than a whisper, but it carried. It carried on the wind, over the rush of the creek, into the tense, waiting forest. "I don't think I will." The scent of her, Stella's cheap, cloying perfume, still clung to the air between us, a poisonous mist over the rushing sound of Crystal Creek. I didn't move. His command, an alpha's direct order, slammed into my omega instincts like a physical blow demanding obedience. My muscles trembled with the urge to turn and flee. But something deeper, something cracked and bleeding in my soul, I looked past him, past the human woman smirking behind his shoulder, and met his furious gaze. The word was a whisper, but it echoed in the clearing louder than the water. Andrew's eyes flared, molten gold with shock and rising rage. Stella's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of theatrical concern. "Andrew," she simpered, her hand coming to rest on his arm again. A possessive gesture, on my mate, while I carried his child. "You will go back to the cabin, Sienna. Now." His voice dropped, the growl in it vibrating in my teeth. It was the voice that commanded the entire pack, that ended disputes and drew borders. It had always worked on me. Not anymore. "I heard you," I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. "You protect her, you comfort her. What do you do for me, Andrew? Your mate? Or am I just the vessel for your heir to be stored away in my pretty cage until I'm useful?" He took a step toward me, and I saw the conflict in the tight line of his jaw. He was alpha. This was insubordination of the highest order, especially in front of an outsider. But I was his pregnant mate. A public scene would undermine him further. Stella was watching, drinking it in, and that, I realized, was the only thing holding him back. "This is not the place," he bit out, each word clipped. "We will discuss this at home." "There is nothing to discuss. I have eyes, I have a nose." I wrapped my arms around my swollen belly, a shield of flesh and bone. "You've made your choice clear." "You understand nothing of my choices," he roared, finally losing the thin veneer of control. The force of his anger made Stella flinch and take a step back. "The safety of this pack rests on my shoulders. Every decision, every alliance. You live in the safety. I provide and dare to question the methods." "Is she an alliance, Andrew?" I asked, nodding toward Stella. The woman had the grace to look affronted. "What does the human town offer us that requires your private midnight counsels?" His silence was more telling than any lie. He couldn't answer because the truth was ugly and personal. He looked at her, and his expression softened infinitesimally. That tiny fracture in his anger, reserved for her, was the final nail. The bond between us, the mate bond I had clung to even in my loneliness, didn't shatter. It dissolved. It simply ceased to be, leaving a hollow, silent cavern in my chest where his presence used to live. I felt it go. A severing. My breath hitched, but I didn't cry. I was done crying. "Go back to the cabin, Sienna," he said again, but the command was hollow now. He was just saying words. The compulsion behind them had vanished with my submission. He must have felt it too, the rupture, because his eyes widened for a fraction of a second before the alpha mask slammed back down. I turned my back on him, on them. It was the most defiant act of my life. An Omega never turns their back on an enraged alpha. It's an invitation for violence, a ultimate sign of disrespect. I heard Stella's sharp intake of breath, the rustle as Andrew stiffened. I waited for the grab on my shoulder, the forced spin, the punishment. It didn't come. I walked into the trees, each step feeling lighter and more terrifying than the last. The forest, which had been my momentary escape, now felt like a tunnel leading to an unknown abyss. I was alone, truly, utterly alone. The mate bond was a tether, a constant, low-grade awareness of the other. Its absence was a deafening silence, a vertigo that made me stumble again. I clutched the rough bark, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was untethered, unbound. I don't know how long I stood there, breathing in the clean scent of sap and soil, trying to wash the perfume and betrayal from my lungs. The sun had dipped lower, casting long, skeletal shadows through the trees, when I heard the careful footsteps. "Sienna." It was James. His voice was gentle, wary. I pushed myself upright, wiping my face, though it was dry. I had no tears left. He emerged from the brush, his kind face etched with worry. "I was patrolling the eastern ridge. I felt a disturbance, a rupture." He didn't specify what. He didn't need to. As Gamma, he was sensitive to the pack's emotional currents. The catastrophic break in the Alpha's mate bond would have reverberated through the pack link like a gunshot. "I'm fine, James," I said, the words automatic. "You're not," he said softly, coming closer. He didn't touch me. He was always respectful of boundaries, a trait rare in werewolf culture. "Andrew returned to the cabin with the human in tow. Bradley is with them. He ordered me to find you and ensure you calmed down." James made a faint, disgusted sound. "He's bringing her into your home, Sienna." My home, the cage, now it would be her stage. A fresh wave of nausea, not from the pregnancy, rolled through me. "Then I won't go back." James paled. "You can't stay out here. It's not safe, especially for you in your condition and without your—" He trailed off, tactful even now. "Without my wolf," I finished for him, a bitter smile touching my lips. My dormant wolf. The source of my shame, my weakness, the reason the pack tolerated me but never respected me. The reason Andrew could so easily disregard me. An Omega with a dormant wolf was little better than a human. "A fragile, you know what I mean," he sighed. "Please, let me escort you back. At least to the edge of the clearing. You shouldn't be alone." His kindness was a lifeline in the sudden, violent sea of my isolation. I nodded, too weary to fight. We walked in silence for a while. The only sounds are footsteps and the distant call of an owl. "James," I said finally, as the lights of the cabin came into view between the trees. "What do you know about Stella?" He tensed beside me. "It's not my place." "Nothing is my place anymore," I interrupted, not unkindly. "Please, I need to know what I'm facing." He was quiet for a long moment, conflicted. Loyalty to his alpha warred with his inherent decency. Decency won. "She's from the town, like you know. Her family has some influence there. A few months ago, there was an incident with a rogue wolf from the northern packs, near the town limits. Andrew intervened. He saved her. She's been grateful, persistent." James rubbed the back of his neck. "Bradley thinks it's a smart political move." "And Andrew?" I asked, my throat tight. "What does he think?" James wouldn't meet my eyes. "He believes she sees him for who he is, not just the alpha. He says she isn't afraid of the wolf. That she's uncomplicated." The words were knives, expertly twisted. Uncomplicated. Unlike me. The pregnant mate with a dormant wolf, with fears, with needs, with the inconvenient ability to see his betrayal. "Thank you, James," I whispered. We had reached the tree line. The cabin stood 50 yards away, warm light glowing in the windows. I could see shadows moving inside. Two tall, masculine ones, Andrew and Bradley. "Will you be all right?" James asked, his concern a tangible thing. "No," I answered honestly, "but I will go in." I walked toward the cabin, each step heavier than the last. As I mounted the porch steps, I could hear their voices through the closed door. "So grateful for your protection, Andrew. I feel so safe here," Stella was saying, her voice a melodic drip of honey. "The Silver Fang Pack protects its allies," Andrew responded, his voice formal, but with an undercurrent I knew too well. It was the tone he used when he was pleased but trying not to show it. Bradley said something low I couldn't catch, and there was a ripple of laughter. "My home." I opened the door. The conversation died instantly. They were in the living area. Andrew stood by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, whiskey from the town. Bradley was perched on the arm of my reading chair, and Stella was on my sofa, curled elegantly into the corner, a cup of tea in her hands. My tea set. All three looked at me. Bradley's expression was pure disdain. Stella's was a mask of sympathetic concern, but her eyes glittered with triumph. Andrew's was unreadable, a stony alpha mask, but I saw the flicker in his gaze, anger, yes, but also something else. A hint of unease. "Sienna," Andrew said, his voice cool. "You've returned." "It's my home," I said simply. I didn't remove my boot. "We were just discussing the upcoming town council meeting," Bradley said, his tone implying I was interrupting vital affairs of state. "Stella has offered to mediate." "How generous," I said, walking past them toward the kitchen. My skin crawled with their collective gaze. Stella's voice followed me, sweet as poison. "Sienna, you look so pale. Can I get you something? Pregnancy must be so taxing, especially for someone like you." I stopped in the kitchen doorway, my hand gripping the frame. "Someone like you, a human, a weakling." I turned slowly. "I am capable of getting my own water, thank you. My condition doesn't render me helpless, just Andrew's jaw tightened. "Sienna, there's no need for hostility. Stella is a guest." "A guest," I repeated. "In the home of a mated pair, how modern." I looked directly at Stella. "Tell me, do human customs often involve cozy, private meetings with married men by creeksides? Or is that Stella's face flushed a satisfying scarlet. She looked to Andrew, her eyes wide and wounded. "Andrew, I didn't mean to overstep." "You didn't," Andrew said, shooting me a warning glare. "Sienna, that's enough. Go to the bedroom. Rest." We have the dismissal. The final exile to the edges of my own life. I looked at the three of them, a united front, the alpha, his loyal beta, and the human who would usurp my place. The hollow in my chest burned with a new, cold fire. I didn't argue. I turned and walked down the short hall to the bedroom, our bedroom. I closed the door but didn't lock it. There was no point. I sat on the edge of the bed, on my side, where the scent of Andrew was already fading from the pillows. The murmur of their voices continued, a low, hateful hum through the walls. I placed my hands on my belly, where my child, his heir, kicked restlessly. A fierce, protective rage bloomed in the hollow place. This was not just about me anymore. He had chosen an outsider over the mother of his child. He had broken our bond. He had brought the threat into our den. I would not be a victim in this story. I would not fade quietly into the background while Stella played the lady of the house. But what could I do? A powerless Omega, a human in all but birth. As I sat there in the deepening dark, a memory surfaced. Not my own, but my mother's voice, a whisper from a childhood I'd tried to forget. A lullaby in a language not of the wolves, but older, stranger. Words about blood and throne and sleeping power. I had always thought them fantasies, stories she told to comfort a little girl who couldn't shift. My mother, who died when I was young, who came from a pack no one ever spoke of. The cold fire in my chest pulsed. It didn't feel like rage anymore. It felt like a key turning in a long-locked door deep inside me where my wolf should have been. The door didn't open, but for the first time in my life, I felt something stir behind it, something that was not a wolf. The bedroom door opened without a knock. Andrew stood silhouetted in the light from the hall. He had finally dismissed his court. "She's gone," he said, his voice flat. "Bradley escorted her back to the border." I said nothing. I just stared at him. He sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. "This defiance ends tonight, Sienna. You will not embarrass me in front of allies again. You will stay in this cabin. You will fulfill your duty and bear my child. That is your role. Accept it." "And Stella?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. "What is her role?" His eyes flashed. "Her role is pack security, something you have never understood. The world is not a safe place for us. We need connections, we need leverage." "You need her," I corrected. He didn't deny it. He took a step into the room, his presence dominating the small space. "The bond is damaged, I feel it. You severed it." "You broke it," I whispered. "It can be repaired," he said, but it sounded like a line he was reciting, not something he believed. "When the child is born, things will settle. You will see the necessity of my actions." He was already rewriting history, justifying the betrayal. He moved as if to come closer, perhaps to touch me, to enforce a physical connection where the mystical one had failed. I recoiled. "Don't." He froze, his hand outstretched. For a fleeting moment, the alpha mask slipped, and I saw not anger but a profound, bewildered hurt. It was gone in an instant, replaced by cold resolve. "As you wish. Rest. You'll need your strength." He left, closing the door firmly behind him. I heard the lock click. Not to keep me in, the flimsy lock couldn't hold a werewolf, even a dormant one. It was a symbol. I was locked away. I sat in the dark for hours, listening to him pace the living room, the scent of his agitation seeping under the door. The memory of my mother's lullaby played on a loop in my mind, the strange words taking on a new, ominous weight. Born of the line where the moon is a crown's power sleeps in the blood. Never gone, only bound. My hands trembled. I looked down at them, pale in the moonlight filtering through the window. I thought of the cold fire, the stirring behind the door. It wasn't my wolf. I knew that now with a terrifying certainty. It was something else. Something that had been sleeping in my blood, bound, as the lullaby said. Waiting. A key turned in the front door lock. It was late, far too late for patrols or pack business. I crept off the bed and pressed my ear to the bedroom door. I heard Andrew's footsteps, quick and quiet, cross the living room floor. Then I heard another set of footsteps, lighter, familiar. And Stella's voice, a hushed, intimate whisper. "I was so worried. I had to come back to see if you were okay after all that tension." My blood turned to ice. She was here, in the middle of the night, and he had let her in. Andrew's response was too low to hear, a murmured rumble. Then the sound of the sofa creaking. A sigh, not his. The cold fire inside me exploded into an inferno of silent, shattering clarity. The lock on my bedroom door was a joke. The cabin was a cage. But the thing stirring in my blood, the legacy of a mother from a pack no one named, began to uncoil. He thought he'd chosen a weak human over his omega. He thought he'd secured his future with a useful ally. As Stella's soft laughter filtered through my prison door, the first crackle of a new, ancient power sparked along my nerve endings. He had no idea what was sleeping in his house. The cold, ancient power that had stirred in my blood when Andrew locked Stella in our home didn't fade with the dawn. It settled, a silent, watchful frost in my veins. A secret I hugged to myself in the pale morning light filtering through the barred bedroom window. I heard them leave just after sunrise, Andrew's low murmur, Stella's lighter, answering laugh, Bradley's gruff tone. The front door clicked shut. Silence, heavy and accusing, filled the cabin. I was alone again, but the cage felt different. Before, it had been a prison of heartbreak. I tested the bedroom door. Still locked. Andrew hadn't even bothered to check on me. My hand, resting on the cool wood, didn't tremble. The lullaby my mother used to sing, the one about queens of stone and starlight, played on a loop in my mind. It wasn't a comfort. It was a reminder. Hours passed. I didn't pace. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting on the slight swell of my stomach, and I listened. Not just with my ears, but with that new, cold sense. I could feel the emptiness of the main room, the weight of the locked door. And then I felt something else, a presence, approaching with careful steps. The key turned in the lock. It wasn't Andrew. The energy was all wrong. The door opened to reveal James, his face etched with apology and worry. He carried a tray of food. "He's gone to the southern border with Bradley. Stella's with them," he said quietly, setting the tray on the dresser. He didn't meet my eyes. "He told me to bring you this and to ensure you remained." "To guard the prisoner," I said, my voice flat. James flinched. "Sienna, What is she, James?" I cut in, standing. The movement was smooth, deliberate. "You called her a liaison. What does that mean? What does she do?" He ran a hand through his hair, conflicted. His loyalty to Andrew warred with the decency that had made him speak to me at the creek. Decency, and perhaps a growing unease. "She's from the town council. After Andrew saved her, she offered to be a point of contact. The pack's relationship with the humans has been tense. She smooths things over." "And the price for her smoothing things over?" I asked, taking a step toward him. "Is it just his attention, or is it my place?" "I don't think he sees it that way," James muttered, but it was weak. "He sees it as a duty. The pack comes first." "The pack," I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping me. "The pack he is deliberately humiliating by locking up his pregnant mate and parading a human around in her stead. Does that feel stable to you, Gamma? Does that feel like strong leadership?" He had no answer. His silence was confirmation enough. "I need to get out of this room, James. Not to run, just to not be in this box for a moment." "I can't. His orders were explicit." "He didn't order you to bar the windows, did he?" I said, looking past him to the main room. The large window in the living area was just visible. It was latched, but not barred. A simple, old-fashioned latch. James followed my gaze, his eyes widening. "Sienna, no, if you run." "I'm not running. I am asking you, as the Gamma of this pack, to escort the Alpha's pregnant mate onto the porch for some fresh air. For the health of the air. Is that not a reasonable duty?" I saw the calculation in his eyes. The risk of Andrew's wrath versus the glaring wrongness of keeping me locked in a bedroom like a misbehaving child. The latter one. He sighed, a heavy, defeated sound. 5 minutes, on the porch. I'll be right behind. The moment I stepped out of the bedroom, the different air hit me. It wasn't just freedom from the locked door. It was the residue of her. Stella's faint, floral perfume hung in the space, overlaying the familiar scents of pine and wood smoke. A blanket was draped carelessly over my usual chair. A mug sat on the table, lipstick staining the rim, a soft pink. I walked past it all, my back straight, and pushed open the front door. The forest air was a balm, clean and sharp. I breathed it in, feeling that cold power inside me resonate with the deep, ancient stillness of the trees. I walked to the edge of the porch, gripping the rough-hewn railing. James hovered behind me, a nervous sentry. "He's making a mistake, James," I said, not looking at him. "And you know it, you all know it. You're just too afraid of him to say it." He's the alpha, James said, but it was a rote response. What does that mean if he abandons his own mate? His own child? I turned then, fixing him with a stare. The cold in me must have shone in my eyes because he took a slight step back. What does an alpha's strength matter if there's no honor in his heart? Before he could formulate a reply, the sound of an approaching engine cut through the forest quiet. A familiar, hated truck bounced up the track toward the cabin. Andrew's. It pulled to a stop, and the doors opened. Andrew emerged first, his expression darkening immediately when he saw me on the porch. Bradley stepped out from the passenger side, his lip curling in disdain. And then Stella slid out from the back, her hand lingering on Andrew's arm as she steadied herself. She was wearing one of my sweaters, a soft, cream-colored cable knit my mother had made. The world narrowed to that sweater, to her possessive touch on his arm, to the way Andrew didn't shake her off. They approached the porch. Andrew's power rolled ahead of him, and Alpha's command meant to intimidate. The old Sienna would have bowed her head. The new one felt the frost in her blood solidify, forming a shield against the pressure. I didn't look away. What is this? Andrew's voice was a low growl directed at James. I gave an order. She needed air, Alpha, James said, his voice strained. For the pup's sake. I decide what she needs, Andrew snapped, his gaze slicing back to me. Get inside, now. I didn't move. My hands tightened on the railing. You gave her my sweater. A flicker of something, irritation, guilt passed over his face, gone in an instant. It was cold by the creek. She didn't have a coat. And my chair, and my mug. My voice was terrifyingly calm. Are you giving her those, too? Is she moving into my bedroom next? Stella had the grace to look slightly abashed, her fingers plucking at the wool of the sweater. I'm so sorry, Sienna. It was just lying there and I was chilled to the bone. Andrew was just being kind. Kind, I echoed. I looked only at Andrew. You locked me in a room. You let her sleep in my home. You dress her in my clothes. Define kind for me, Alpha. I seem to have forgotten. His eyes flashed molten gold. You are pushing me, Sienna. You will go inside and you will remember your place. I laughed and the sound was sharp as breaking ice. My place is wherever you need a vessel, isn't it? A womb for your heir. A symbol to keep the pack placated. I finally looked at Stella and the cold in me focused. Her place is at your side. Her voice is the one you listen to. Tell me, Stella, as our esteemed liaison, do the humans on the town council know you're sleeping with the werewolf alpha whose territory you're supposed to be negotiating with? Stella's face went pale. Andrew took a menacing step forward, but Bradley was faster, putting a restraining hand on his arm. Alpha, Bradley said, his eyes on me with pure venom. She's hysterical. The pregnancy, I am thinking more clearly than I ever have, I said. The ancient power was a drumbeat in my blood now, a rhythm that matched the slow, deep heart of the forest itself. I see you, Andrew, all of you. I gestured between him and Stella. This isn't duty. This is a choice. You are choosing a human over your mate. You are choosing her over your pack's future. Enough. The command was a physical force, meant to bend my will. It crashed against the icy fortress inside me and shattered. I didn't even blink. The shock on his face was the most satisfying thing I'd ever seen. His alpha command had failed. On his omega mate, in front of his beta and a human. A deadly silence fell. Bradley stared, stunned. James looked from Andrew to me, his mouth agape. Stella just looked confused, not understanding the monumental thing that had just happened. Andrew's shock hardened into something dangerous. James, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Take her inside, to the bedroom. Bolt the door from the outside. You will stand guard until I say otherwise. If she's... James, pale and shaken, moved toward me. Sienna, please, he whispered, pleading. I looked at Andrew one last time. The mate bond was gone, severed by my own will, but in that moment I felt the last fragile thread of anything I'd ever felt for him snap. There was only the cold and the resolve. I turned and walked inside myself, sparing James the indignity of dragging me. I heard Andrew bark an order at Stella to wait outside, and then he and Bradley followed us in. As I passed the hearth, my mother's lullaby rose in my mind, clear as a bell. When the wolf's bond lies broken, and the heart turns to stone, remember, my daughter, the blood is your throne. James escorted me to the bedroom, his hand trembling on my elbow. He couldn't meet my eyes. He pushed the door open and I walked in. Before he could close it, I turned. Andrew stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching, Bradley a shadow at his shoulder. "You should have chosen your pack, Andrew," I said, my voice carrying in the still room. "You should have chosen your child, but you chose a human. Remember that choice when everything you have begins to fall apart." I didn't wait for a response. I stepped back, and James, with a final, agonized look, closed the door. I heard the heavy, definitive sound of the new bolt being driven home on the outside. Darkness, but for the sliver of light under the door. Silence, but for the sound of my own steady breath and the twin heartbeats within me, mine and my pup's. I sat on the bed in the dark. The cold power wasn't angry. It was patient. It was waiting. I closed my eyes, and instead of despair, I reached for it. I followed the feeling down, deep into my core, past the pain, past the betrayal, to where something old and silent slept. My mother's face floated in my memory. Not as I'd last seen her, sick and fading, but strong, with eyes that held the glint of mountain peaks. She had never spoken of her family. She had warned me to never, ever sing the lullaby where others could hear. "The blood is your throne." I placed my hands on my stomach. "I don't know what we are," I whispered to my child, "but we are not his, not anymore." I focused on the cold power. I didn't try to wield it. I simply acknowledged it. I invited it in. And as I did, the world shifted. My senses, always dull and human, sharpened explosively, but not into the wolf senses I'd longed for. This was different. I could feel the weight of the stones in the cabin's foundation. I could feel the slow, patient growth of the trees outside, their roots deep in the earth. I could feel the flow of Crystal Creek in the distance, a silver thread of energy, and I could feel the life in my own womb, a bright, pulsing star of potential. The power wasn't a wolf. It was something of the earth itself, something older. A soft gasp escaped my lips as understanding dawned. My mother's line, we weren't just dormant wolves. We were something else entirely, something that had been hiding. A sharp noise from the main room broke my concentration. A thud, followed by a low, pained groan. It was James's voice. Then Andrew's, thick with a rage I'd never heard before. "You what?" I was on my feet, pressed against the door, listening. "I'm sorry, Alpha." James's voice was strained, fearful. She was asking questions, and I just told her about Stella's role with the humans. I thought it might placate. "You gave her information, after I explicitly told you to keep her isolated." There was the sound of a scuffle, a body hitting the wall. "Your sentiment for her is a weakness, Gamma, one I can no longer afford." "Alpha, please. I'm loyal. Your loyalty is to me, not to her." "Bradley," Andrew barked. "Take him to the cells. He can cool off and remember where his allegiance lies." Cells, they had detention cells near the border outpost, rarely used. They were putting James in a cell for talking to me. The betrayal was a fresh wound, but it was immediately cauterized by the icy fury rising in me. James, who had shown a shred of kindness, was being punished for it. Andrew was systematically eradicating any trace of compassion, any connection I had left. I heard Bradley's gruff assent, the sound of dragging footsteps, the front door opening and closing. Then silence, but not for long. Heavy footsteps approached my door. A key turned not in the new bolt, but in the original lock. The door swung open. Andrew filled the doorway, his frame outlined by the firelight from the main room. His face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. In his hand, he held a small, familiar object, my mother's silver hair comb, the one she'd said was passed down through generations. I kept it in a small box on the dresser, a treasured, secret thing. My blood ran cold. "What is this?" he asked, his voice deceptively soft. He held up the comb. It was old, intricately worked with patterns that resembled neither wolves nor any human design I knew. They looked like interlocking mountain ranges, like constellations. "That's mine," I said, my voice barely. "I've never seen markings like this," he said, ignoring me, turning the comb over in his hands. "It's not Pack. It's not from any allied territory. Your mother, you never spoke of her family." "It's just a comb," I lied, the cold power inside me coiling, ready. "Is it?" He took a step into the room, his eyes piercing me. "Your defiance today. My command didn't work on you, an alpha command, on an omega." He said the word like a curse. "That shouldn't be possible, unless you're not what you seem." He looked from the comb to me, his gaze calculating, suspicious. "What are you, Sienna?" He took another step closer, looming over me. The comb was in one hand, his other fist clenched at his side. "I will have the truth, from you or from this." He gestured with the comb. "Your mother's heirloom, your last connection to her. Tell me what this means. Tell me why my commands don't work on you, or I will melt it down to slag before your eyes." He meant it. I could see it in the set of his jaw, in the ruthless glint in his eyes. To him, it was a piece of jewelry, a tool to extract information. To me, it was the only physical key to a heritage I was just beginning to understand. The cold power within me didn't surge. It crystallized. It focused into a single, razor-sharp point of will. I looked from the comb to his face, and I did not beg. I did not plead. "You have already taken my mate, my home, and my freedom," I said, my voice clear and ringing in the small, dark room. "You will not take this from me, too." I didn't move my hands. I didn't snarl. I simply looked at the comb in his grasp and willed it. The ancient silver, forged by a bloodline he could not comprehend, heard the call of its queen. The comb grew ice gold in Andrew's hand, a sharp, painful cold that burned. He hissed in surprise and pain, his fingers springing open involuntarily. But the comb didn't fall to the floor. It hung in the air between us for a suspended second, glinting in the dim light. Then, as if pulled by an invisible thread, it flew across the space and slapped neatly, perfectly, into my waiting palm. The warmth of it seeped into my skin, a greeting, an acknowledgement. Andrew stared at his empty, reddening hand, then at the comb in mine. His face went from fury to shock, to a dawning, horrifying comprehension. The alpha who feared no wolf, who had bargained with humans and locked away his mate, took a full step back from me, his golden eyes wide with something that looked, for the very first time, like fear. He wasn't looking at his pregnant Omega anymore. He was looking at a stranger, at a power he did not understand, at a queen he had just foolishly made his enemy. And outside the bolted door, in the silent cabin, we both heard the distinct, gentle sound of the newly installed steel bolt sliding open all by itself. The door clicked open. Andrew stared at the silver comb now clutched in my hand, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fear. It was a sight I would savor forever. The air in the room still hummed with the residue of whatever I had done, a cold, crystalline energy that felt more like remembering than learning. He took a step back, then another, his alpha bravado crumbling. "What are you?" he whispered, the question a ragged breath. I didn't answer. I simply stood there, the comb of familiar, humming weight in my palm, my other hand resting on the swell of my stomach. The child within me stirred, not with a kick, but with a soft, echoing pulse that resonated with the power in my veins. We were connected in this, too. "You will stay in this room," Andrew said, but it was no longer a command. It was a plea, a desperate attempt to reassert a control he had just witnessed shatter. I tilted my head. "Or what, Andrew? You'll destroy my things? Your commands don't work on me. Your threats are empty." I took a step forward, and he flinched. The sheer power of that small movement, an alpha flinching from his omega, sent a thrill through me that was sharper than any fear. "You imprisoned James for showing me kindness. What will you do to yourself for creating this?" He had no answer. With one last, wide-eyed look, he turned and left, pulling the door shut behind him. I heard the bolt slide home, a useless, metallic sigh. I looked at the lock and focused. The cold energy rose easily, a gentle push. The bolt slid back with a soft thunk. I didn't open the door. Let him think his prison held. The knowledge that it did not was my first true weapon. Silence descended, but it was a different silence. Before, it had been heavy with despair. Now it was alive with potential. I looked at the comb. In the dim light, the intricate engravings seemed to move, telling stories in a language my soul understood, but my mind was only beginning to translate. My mother's lullaby whispered in my memory, no longer just a comfort, but an incantation. "Blood of the moon, bone of the hill, where the silent ones their vows fulfill." Who were the silent ones? What vows? I spent the next few hours in a state of focused calm. I tested the edges of this new sense. With a thought, I could make the dust motes dance in a sunbeam. I could feel the deep, slow heartbeat of the forest outside, the roots of the ancient trees stretching far beneath the cabin's foundation. It was an awareness that went beyond my five senses, a connection to the land itself. And the land, I realized with a jolt, was not speaking to me through the filter of the pack bond. This was separate, older. My reverie was broken by the sound of voices below, Bradley's gruff tone and Stella's light, artificial laugh. A wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my pregnancy rolled through me. They were in my home. She was in my home. I moved to the window, staying in the shadows. Below, on the patch of grass that passed for a front yard, Stella was admiring the woods, her arms wrapped around herself. Bradley stood beside her, a sentinel. "It's so wild here," Stella said, her voice carrying up. "So untamed. Andrew says it's dangerous for someone like me to be out alone." "The Alpha is wise," Bradley replied. "There are things in these woods that don't respect human boundaries." "Good thing I have such strong protectors," she simpered, touching Bradley's arm. He didn't pull away. "How is she?" "Up there." Bradley's gaze flicked up toward my window, and I drew back. "Contained, for the good of the pack. It must be so hard for Andrew," Stella sighed, a masterpiece of false sympathy. "Tied to someone so unstable, especially now, he deserves peace." The audacity stole my breath. Bradley, to his eternal shame, murmured in agreement. "The Alpha bears many burdens." So that was the story they were weaving. I was the unstable, disobedient mate, a problem to be managed. She was the comforting, human solace. And my child was the burden Andrew had to bear. Rage, hot and clarifying, burned away the last of my lingering heartbreak. This was no longer about a love betrayed. This was about a throne usurped, a kingdom I hadn't even known was mine being invaded. I waited until dusk. The cabin grew quiet. I could feel Andrew's presence, a tense, wary knot of energy in his study below. He was afraid of me. Good. Fear was a better shield than love had ever been. I pushed open my door, the unoiled hinge making no sound under a whisper of my will. The hallway was dark. I moved like a ghost, my bare feet silent on the wood. I wasn't sure where I was going, only that I needed to be outside, under the sky, away from these walls that had been my cage. I slipped out the back door, into the cool evening. The forest welcomed me, the energy in my blood singing in harmony with the rustling leaves and the rich, dark scent of soil. I walked, not toward the creek, but deeper into the woods, to a small, rocky clearing I had always liked. The moon was a sliver in the sky, a claw mark of silver. I sat on a cold, flat stone and placed the comb beside me. I closed my eyes and let my awareness sink down, past the leaf litter, past the topsoil, into the network of roots and stone and ancient, sleeping things. Blood of the moon, bone of the hill. I sang it softly, not a lullaby now, but a call. Something answered. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure, a presence so vast and slow it made the towering pines seem like blades of grass. It was the hill itself, and it knew my blood. A vision, sharp and clear, flashed behind my eyes. Not my mother, but a woman with her eyes, dressed in robes of woven bark and starlight, standing on this very rock, her hands raised to a full moon. Around her, the shadows were not empty. They were full of sleek, silent forms with eyes that shone with a silver, intelligent light. Wolves, but not wolves, something more. The silent ones. The vision faded, leaving me trembling. The power within me wasn't just a tool. It was a lineage, a sovereign. My eyes flew open. Andrew stood at the edge of the clearing, backlit by the distant cabin lights. His expression was unreadable, caught between anger, fear, and a dawning, horrible understanding. "What are you doing out here?" His voice was low, strained. "Listening," I said, not moving. He took a step into the clearing, his alpha aura pushing against the atmosphere of the place. The ancient, welcoming energy recoiled, hardening. The clearing suddenly felt colder. "You will come back to the cabin." Now I smiled, a thin, cold curve of my lips. "Make me," he growled, a true, bestial sound of frustration. "This defiance ends tonight, Sienna. You are my mate. You carry my heir. You will What pack law?" I asked, standing slowly. The comb felt warm in my hand. "The law that lets you shackle yourself to a human while your true mate rots. The law that imprisons a good man for an act of mercy. Your law is a rusted chain, Andrew, and I am not bound by it." He shifted then, not fully, but enough that his claws sprang from his fingertips, his eyes glowing amber in the dark. It was a display of dominance, one that would have had any pack wolf, even a beta, lowering their eyes. I met his gaze and raised my chin. The cold power surged, not as a wave, but as an anchor, rooting me to the stone, to the hill, to the deep, patient power below. The air around me shimmered, not with heat, but with a faint, silvery luminescence like moonlight on frost. Andrew's advance halted. He stared at the shimmer, at my unflinching face. "Your mother," he said, the pieces clicking together with terrible clarity. "She wasn't just a rogue wolf, was she? When we found her, she was alone, but she wasn't scared. She looked at me like I was the intruder." "You were," I said simply. "What did she pass to you?" he demanded, a desperate edge in his voice. "What poison is in your blood?" "It's not poison," I said, my voice echoing with a resonance that wasn't entirely my own. "It's a crown. And you, Andrew of the Silver Fang, are standing in my kingdom." The words hung in the air, a declaration that changed everything. The rustling forest fell utterly silent, as if holding it. Then, from the dense trees behind Andrew, Stella stumbled into the clearing. She must have followed him. Her eyes were wide, her face pale in the gloom. She looked from Andrew's half-shifted, fearful form to me, standing radiant and unyielding on the stone. "Andrew," she quavered. "What's happening? What is—" Andrew didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on me, seeing me for the first time. Not as his omega, not as a vessel, but as a rival power. Stella, emboldened by his silence or her own foolishness, took a step toward me. "You're causing him so much pain. Why can't you just be what he needs?" A fury, white-hot and precise, lanced through me. This human, this insect, dared to speak to me of my mate's pain. In my woods, my focus shifted from Andrew to her. I didn't raise a hand. I didn't need to. I just looked at her and let the cold, ancient essence of the territory rise. The ground at her feet didn't shake. It softened. One moment she was on solid ground, the next her shoes sank into the earth as if into thick mud. She yelped, trying to pull back, but the forest floor clung to her, holding her fast up to her ankle. "The land knows an intruder," I said, my voice calm. Andrew finally moved, not toward me, but toward Stella. He grabbed her arm, yanking her free with a wet, sucking sound. She clung to him, sobbing in shock and terror. He held her, but he stared at me. "This is madness." "No," I corrected him softly. "This is consequence. You chose a human over your mate. You chose a stranger over your queen. Now live with the terrain of your choice." I turned my back on them, a dismissal more absolute than any attack. I heard Stella's muffled cries, Andrew's low, urgent commands to be quiet, their stumbling retreat through the undergrowth. Alone again, the energy around me settled. But the revelation did not. Queen. The word thrummed in my soul. It wasn't a metaphor. I knew what I had to do. James was imprisoned for helping me. The pack was blind, following an alpha who feared the truth sleeping in his own house. And my child, my heir, would not be born in a cage, under the rule of a coward. I needed to find the silent ones from the lullaby. I needed to understand the vows. And I knew, with a certainty that sank to my bones, that the answers were not within Silverfang territory. They were beyond it. I had to leave. But as I made my way back to the cabin, a new sound reached my ears, a sound that froze the blood in my veins. It was the distant, mournful howl of a wolf, rising and falling in a specific, urgent pattern. It was repeated from another direction, then another. It was the pack's alarm call, a perimeter breach. But this wasn't the alert for an intruder from outside. This was the call for a fugitive from within. Andrew hadn't just retreated to lick his wounds. He had gone back and raised the alarm. On me. The howls grew closer, converging. The hunt was on. And I, heavy with child and still so new to my power, was the prey. The howls were a closing circle of sound, stitching the night shut around me. I stood in the clearing, the memory of my ancestors' touch still humming in my bones, and knew the theory of my escape was over. Now came the practice. I couldn't outrun them, not in a straight chase. My body, though humming with a new energy, was still heavy with my child, and my legs were no match for wolf speed. Andrew would have sent out the fastest hunters, the most loyal trackers. Bradley would be among them, relishing the chance to drag me back. My only advantage was that they were hunting for Sienna, the weak Omega. They were not hunting for whatever I was becoming. I didn't run deeper into the woods. Instead, I turned and placed my palm flat against the rough bark of the oldest tree at the clearing's edge. The vision had come here. The memory lived here. "Hide me," I whispered, not a plea but an acknowledgement. "I am of this. This is of me." The earth didn't tremble or open, but the shadows at the base of the tree seemed to deepen, to coalesce. The ferns curled closer. It was a subtle shift, a bending of light and perception. I moved into that pocket of deepened night, pressing my back against the trunk, and let the forest fold around me. I saw them less than a minute later. 3 wolves, pelts gray and brown in the moonlight, flowing into the clearing. Their muzzles swept the ground, snuffling. The lead wolf, a massive brute with a scar across his shoulder, was Jax, one of Andrew's most relentless enforcers. He lifted his head, scenting the air. I held my breath, not just in my lungs, but in my spirit, willing the quiet of the land into my very cells. Jax's gaze passed over my hiding place. It hesitated for a fraction of a second, a flicker of canine confusion, then moved on. With a low chuff, He led the others in a direction leading away from the cabin, toward the northern border. They were following the trail I'd intentionally laid hours earlier, a false scent on the wind I'd asked the breeze to carry. The land had complied. As the sound of their passage faded, I sagged against the tree. It had worked, not through force but through belonging. They could not see what was part of the whole, but this was temporary. Andrew would not give up. The alarm howl had been absolute. I was a fugitive, a rival power, and the carrier of his heir. Every instinct he possessed would be laser-focused on my retrieval. I needed to get out of the core territory. The vision had shown me the silent ones in places untouched by pack claim. I needed to find those places. Pushing away from the tree, I offered a silent pulse of gratitude into the bark. A warm, faint thrum answered. I moved not like prey, but like a shadow of the land itself. I asked the brambles not to snag my dress. I asked the stones to lie steady under my feet. I didn't know the exact geography beyond our borders, but my feet seemed to find a path that felt older than the pack's patrol routes. The further I went, the quieter the bond to Andrew became, not just emotionally severed, but geographically diluted. The constant, angry pressure of his presence in my mind faded to a distant, dull throb. Dawn was a gray suggestion in the east when I found the river. It wasn't Crystal Creek. This was wider, stronger, singing a deeper song. It marked a boundary I instinctively knew. On this side, the trees, though ancient, bore the subtle marks of pack, scent markers on stones, old patrol paths. Across the river, the forest looked untamed. Wilder, this was my chance. But the river was swift and deep, and I was no swimmer, especially not now. I stood on the bank, frustration a sharp taste in my mouth. I could feel the difference, the promise over there, but it was locked away by this rushing water. The land provides for its queen, I murmured, echoing the words from my vision. So provide. I looked down at the water, then at the stones along the bank. An idea, wild and instinctive, formed. I knelt, ignoring the damp seeping into my knees, and placed both hands on the rocky shore. I didn't ask the river to part. I asked the stones to remember their connection to the stones on the other side. I focused on the deep, slow memory of rock, the patient unity of things that had once been one. My power unspooled, not as a violent command, but as a reminder, a reunion. The stones beneath my hands grew warm. Then, from the riverbed, a series of larger, mossy stones began to rise. Not dramatically, but with a grinding, ancient certainty. They broke the surface, one after another, forming a rough, natural causeway across the widest, shallowest part of the river. The water rushed around them, furious at the obstruction, but the stones held. They were remembering they were a bridge. Tears of sheer awe pricked my eyes. This was not werewolf magic. This was something elemental, sovereign. With a heart pounding in triumph and terror, I stepped onto the first stone. It was solid, unwavering. I crossed the river, each step a farewell to the world I had known. On the other side, the air did feel different. Cleaner, sharper. The pack's mental static was gone entirely. For the first time since my awakening, I felt truly alone. And yet, I was more connected than ever. The trees here seemed to watch me with a passive, ancient curiosity. I walked until the sun was fully up, dappling the forest floor. Exhaustion, deep and bone-heavy, began to claim me. The adrenaline of the night was spent. I found a small, sheltered hollow formed by the roots of a gigantic fallen cedar. It was dry and carpeted with soft, decaying wood. It felt safe. As I settled into the hollow, my hands instinctively cradled my belly. My child. In the chaos, I had barely had time to think of the life within me. What did this power mean for them? Were they an heir to a throne, or a pawn in a war between their father and their mother? A fresh wave of loneliness, profound and desolate, washed over me. I was a queen of trees and stones, but I was also a pregnant woman, scared and alone in the wilderness. Sleep took me, deep and dreamless. I was woken not by sound, but by absence. A silence so complete it was itself a noise. The birdsong had stopped. The rustle of insects had ceased. I opened my eyes, my body stiff, to see the late afternoon light slanting through the trees. And I saw the eyes. Silver, intelligent, watching from the shadows between the firs. Not the yellow of wolves, a cool, metallic silver. They were there and then they weren't, a flicker of perception. My breath caught. The silent ones. I sat up slowly, not wanting to startle them. "I've been looking for you," I said, my voice raspy with sleep and hope. Nothing moved. But the silence changed, becoming my mother, her bloodline, you know it. I saw you in a vision. Please, I need to understand. A branch cracked to my left. I turned my head. A figure stood at the edge of the hollow. It was wolf, but profoundly not. Larger than any werewolf I'd seen in true form, its fur a mix of storm cloud gray and living bark brown. Its eyes were the silver from the shadows, holding a depth of knowledge that made my human mind reel. And around its neck, faintly glowing, was what looked like a torque of twisted vines and moon-pale metal. It did not speak, but an image blossomed in my mind, clear as my own memory. My mother, young, laughing, placing the silver comb in her hair in a sun-drenched meadow that looked like this very forest. Yes, I thought back, the wordless communication feeling natural. She was mine. The creature, the silent one, dipped its massive head. Another image. My mother weeping, burying the comb in a small box under a specific, lightning-scarred tree. A tree I recognized. It was on the very edge of Silver Fang territory, near the cabin. She had hidden her truth to keep me safe. Why? I pushed the question into the space between us. What a flood of impressions, not words, cascaded into me. A lineage of women, keepers of the balance, sovereigns of the wild places that existed before territories and packs. We were not werewolves. We were something older, rarer. The power was one of connection, of covenant with the untamed world. It was not for dominance. The title queen was not about ruling subjects, but about bearing the responsibility for a kingdom that was the land itself. The silent ones were the land's first children. They were its memory and its will, and they had been waiting for the bloodline to reawaken. A profound sense of rightness settled over me, so deep it was a physical relief. This was my inheritance, not a pack, but a purpose. The silent one stepped closer. It lowered its head, and I, without fear, reached out and touched the fur between its ears. It was like touching living history. A pulse of energy, warm and affirming, passed between us. Then its head snapped up. Its silver eyes narrowed, looking back the way I had come. A low, subsonic growl vibrated through the air. An image flashed, wolves, many of them, at the river. Andrew. He had found my crossing point. My newfound peace shattered. The silent one looked at me, and the image it sent was clear. A choice. I could stay here with them, and they would hide me. The land would fight for me. It would be a war, and this forest would run with blood, or I could face him. Not as a fugitive, but as what I was. My hand went to my belly. A war would endanger my child. But running forever was no life for a queen or for an heir. "I have to face him," I whispered, the decision solidifying as I said it. "He needs to see. He needs to know what he betrayed. And then he needs to let me go." The silent one's gaze held mine. There was approval there and a grim resolve. It turned and began to walk, not back toward the river, but on a parallel path that would curve around to meet the pack's advance on different ground. A place of my choosing. I followed. We came to a wide, flat expanse of bedrock that overlooked a deep ravine. The other side of the ravine was Silver Fang territory. It was a natural stage, a border made of stone and air. Here, the setting sun painted everything in blood and gold. I didn't have to wait long. They emerged from the trees on the far side of the ravine. Andrew in the lead, in human form, his face a mask of cold alpha fury. Bradley beside him, and a dozen pack warriors in wolf and human form flanking them. They fanned out, a wall of muscle and hostility. Andrew's eyes locked onto me across the divide. For a fleeting second, I saw something raw and complex, relief, fury, betrayal. Then it was buried under the alpha. "Sienna!" His voice, amplified by his power, boomed across the ravine. "This ends now. You will return. For the sake of the child," I took a step forward, to the very edge of the bedrock. I felt the Silent One melt into the shadows behind me, a silent, formidable witness. "The child is mine, Andrew," I called back, my voice steady, carried by the wind. It did not roar like his, but it cut. "You forfeited any claim when you chose a human over your mate, when you locked me away and punished kindness. You are not my alpha." A ripple went through the pack. No one spoke to the alpha like that. His expression darkened. "You are unwell. The pregnancy, the stress, it has broken your mind. This rebellion stops." He poured the full force of his alpha command into his next words, a wave of compulsion meant to buckle my knees. "Come." The command hit me. I felt it, a pressure against my skin like a strong wind, but it could not touch the core of me. The sovereign power within me, the covenant with the land, stood firm. I didn't even flinch. His eyes widened in shock. Bradley snarled. "Your commands have no power over me, Andrew," I said, and I let my own power rise. Not to attack, but to reveal. I felt the bedrock beneath my feet, the ancient bones of the world. I felt the roots of the trees behind me, the pulse of the river in the distance. The air hummed with a subtle, potent energy. The very light seemed to bend toward me. "What are you?" Andrew breathed, the question torn from him. "I am my mother's daughter," I said, lifting my chin. "I am the bloodline you never bothered to know. You saw a dormant wolf and thought me weak. You saw a human rival and thought her a threat. You understand nothing." I gestured to the ravine between us. "This is my kingdom, and you are not welcome in it." Bradley took a step forward, transforming into his wolf form in a ripple of anger. "Enough of this witchcraft. Seize her." Two wolves lunged forward, leaping for the ravine, aiming for the narrow ledges to cross. They never made it. I didn't raise a hand. I simply looked at the stone of the ravine wall and thought, no. The rock itself seemed to shift. Handholds crumbled. Foot-wide ledges sheared away into dust. The two wolves yelped, scrambling back to the far side as a minor avalanche of stone crashed into the depths below. The message was unmistakable. The land itself rejected them. A stunned silence. Andrew stared at me, his fury now mixed with a dawning, horrified comprehension. He was not looking at his disobedient Omega. He was looking at a force of nature, a rival sovereign, just as he'd named me. "The child," he said again, but the demand was gone. It was a question laced with fear. "Will know its true heritage," I finished. "You will leave. You will call off your hunt. You will stay on your side of the wild places. This is the only peace I offer you." His jaw worked. I could see the war in him, the alpha who could not concede, the male who had lost something precious, the strategist who saw an unconquerable enemy. The pack watched him, waiting for his order. He opened his mouth, and I knew he would choose pride. He would order a full assault, damn the consequences. But before he could speak, a new sound cut through the tension. A high, pained scream, familiar and utterly out of place, echoed from the trees behind the pack's position. Stella, all heads including Andrew's, whipped around, his focus shattered, his face flooding with a very different kind of fear. He didn't look back at me. He just turned and ran, crashing into the foliage toward the sound of her cries, his pack scrambling to follow him. In an instant, the formidable force assembled to reclaim me had dissolved, summoned away by the distress of a human. I stood alone on the bedrock, the echo of Stella's scream hanging in the air. And the final, bitter truth settled into my heart like stone. Even now, presented with the undeniable proof of what I was, his choice remained unchanged. The cliff's edge felt symbolic. Behind me was the wild, my kingdom, my future. Before me was the world I was leaving. I turned my back on it, but as I took my first step toward the deepening shadows where the Silent One waited, a new scent reached me on the shifting wind. It was the coppery tang of blood, a lot of it, and it was laced with the distinct, cloying perfume Stella always wore. And beneath that, something else. Something dark, chemical, and utterly foreign to the forest. The scream hadn't been one of simple fear. It had been the sound of someone terribly, violently hurt. My steps faltered. A human bleeding out in the woods because of a werewolf conflict she'd insisted on entering. A life, however despicable, in jeopardy. The queen in me knew the balance of life and death was sacred. The woman in me, the one Andrew had abandoned, felt a cold dread. The Silent One's presence in my mind was a warning pulse, an image of a snare closing. But the howl that followed was Andrew's, and it was not a sound of anger. It was a raw, desperate cry of anguish. Against every instinct of self-preservation, I turned around. I had to see. I had to know what had happened in those woods. And as I looked back toward the territory I had just forsaken, I saw a thin, dark tendril of unnatural smoke beginning to rise above the tree line, carrying that foul chemical sent directly toward me. The scent hit me first, coppery blood, thick and wrong. Then the smoke, acrid and chemical, stinging my nose even from across the ravine. I had turned my back, ready to vanish into my woods forever. But that smell, it was a hook in my soul, yanking my gaze back to the bedrock stage. Andrew was already a blur, sprinting toward the source of Stella's scream, his warriors stumbling after him, shaken by the land's rejection. Bradley shot me a final, venomous look before following. In moments, the rocky clearing was empty save for the Silent Ones, who stood like silver-sheened statues at the I should have left. Every instinct of self-preservation, every newly awakened fiber of my sovereign being, told me to cross the river and let the Silver Fang pack burn in whatever chaos they'd invited. But the blood on the wind wasn't just Stella's. It was laced with something else, something that made the ancient power in my veins hum with alarm. It smelled of violation. The wound in the land is not natural, I said, not turning to the Silent Ones, but knowing they heard. One, the large male with wise eyes, stepped forward. His voice was the rustle of leaves in my mind. The human brought more than ambition. She brought a sickness from the world of concrete and steel. It eats at the edges of your kingdom. My kingdom, the land that had just answered my call. It was hurting. I didn't make a conscious decision. My feet were moving, carrying me back across the stone bridge I had willed into existence. The stones trembled under my soles, not from weakness, but from a shared pulse of urgency. The Silent Ones melted into the shadows, flanking me, an unseen. I followed the trail of distress, the land whispering guidance beneath my feet. The smoke grew thicker, clotting the clean forest air. I found them in a small, tragic clearing not far from the Alpha's cabin. The scene was one of grotesque panic. A strange, cylindrical metal device lay on its side, spewing gray, chemical-smelling smoke. Several young pack warriors were coughing, their eyes streaming. Stella lay writhing, her fashionable jeans torn, her leg a mess of blood and angry, blackened flesh. Not claw marks. This was a burn, but like no burn I'd ever seen. It was bubbling, eating into her. Andrew crouched over her, his face ashen, his hands hovering uselessly. "What is this?" he roared, looking at the human contraption. The wildlife repeller, Stella gasped, her face contorted in agony. The salesman said it was safe. A high-frequency pulse, then a deterrent smoke if animals breached the perimeter. I just wanted to feel safe out here, Andrew. I didn't know it would explode. A wildlife repeller. She had brought a piece of her fearful, destructive world and planted it in the heart of the forest. It had malfunctioned. Get the pack doctor, Andrew barked at Bradley. He's at the northern outpost, Alpha. It'll take an hour to fetch him, Bradley replied, his voice tight. She doesn't have an hour, James's voice said, rough from disuse. He stood at the edge of the clearing, released from his cells but still in torn clothes. His eyes met mine briefly, filled with a complex sorrow before returning to Stella's leg. That's chemical and thermal damage. It's corrosive. It'll kill her, and then it'll poison the soil here for a generation. Andrew's head snapped up, his alpha aura flaring in his desperation. There must be something. A poultice, an herb. Your herbs are for clean wounds and fevers, Alpha, James said, his deference gone, replaced by the grim truth. That's when Andrew's wild, frantic gaze found me. I stood at the tree line, the silent ones just visible in the dappled shadows behind me. His eyes widened, not with anger now, but with a desperate, dawning hope that looked utterly foreign on his face. Sienna, my name was a ragged breath. Your power the land, can you? All eyes turned to me. The pack warriors, confused and fearful. Bradley, resentful. James, pleading. Stella, through her pain, looked at me with pure, undiluted hatred. I felt the land's pain, a sympathetic throb where the poison was seeping into the roots. I felt the ancient power within me, cool and deep like bedrock water. It was not healing power, not in the way they meant. It was power of sovereignty. I could let her die. It would be justice, in a way. A tidy end to the human who sought to steal my life. The land might even recover faster without the poison in its heart. I looked at Andrew, truly looked at him. The mighty Alpha, brought to his knees not by a rival, but by his own poor choice. He had chosen a creature who feared this world so much she tried to cage it with machines. And the world had fought back. Please, he whispered, the word tearing from him. It was the first time he had ever begged me for anything. The baby moved inside me, a soft, insistent roll, a life, a future. I did not do it for Andrew. I did not do it for Stella. I did it for the land, my kingdom, which was crying out in pain. And I did it for the principle that in my domain, even the foolish and the poisonous were subject to my judgment, not to blind accident. I stepped forward. The pack warriors shrank back. The silent ones watched, their silver eyes glowing. I knelt on the earth, away from Stella, placing my palms flat on the soil. I closed my eyes. I did not ask the land. I commanded it as its queen. This poison is an invader, I thought, pouring my will into the ground. It does not belong to your story. Reject it. Draw it out. Contain it. The earth beneath my hands grew warm. A subtle vibration hummed up through my arms. I focused on the contaminated soil around the device, on the corruption spreading from Stella's wound into the very flesh of the world. A collective gasp went up. I opened my eyes. From the blackened soil around the metal canister, from the very edges of Stella's gruesome burn, tiny tendrils of dark, viscous liquid were being drawn out. They beat it up like mercury, then flowed in impossible rivulets across the ground, away from Stella, away from the roots of the trees, gathering into a single, shimmering, toxic pool on a flat stone. The land was expelling the poison, heeding my command. Stella's screaming subsided into whimpers. The angry, bubbling blackness receded from her wound, leaving behind a severe but clean burn. The chemical smoke from the device sputtered and died. I stood, my legs slightly unsteady. The effort had been immense, a draining not of my body, but of my connection. The land sighed in relief. Andrew stared at the gathered pool of poison, then at Stella's now treatable leg, then finally at me. His expression was shattered, a mosaic of awe, horror, and devastating comprehension. "You are a queen," he said. "The title I am," I replied, my voice echoing with a resonance that was not entirely my own. "And this," I gestured to the forest, the clearing, the very air, "is my kingdom. You are in it on my sufferance, Andrew. You and your pack." Bradley looked like he wanted to protest, but one glance at the silently watching silver-eyed figures in the woods stole his voice. I turned my attention to Stella. She was conscious, watching me with terror. "The land has spared you," I told her, my tone devoid of mercy. "It will not spare you twice. You will leave these woods, you will never return. If you do, the stones will know your step, and the rivers will refuse to bear your weight. This is my decree." She nodded, a quick, jerky motion, too scared to even speak. I finally addressed Andrew, the man who was my mate, the father of my child, and now a subject in a realm he thought he ruled. "The Silverfang pack may remain in its territory. The cabins, the outposts, the land you have walked on for generations. But it is a leasehold, Andrew, granted by my grace. The wilds beyond the river are mine absolutely. The heart of the forest is mine. Your authority here is superseded by mine. You will hunt with respect. You will build with care." He bowed his head. It was not a full submission, and Alpha could never fully submit, but it was an acknowledgement. "A treaty. And us?" he asked, his voice hollow. "There is no us," I said, and the finality of it was a clean cut. The severed mate bond was a scar, but it no longer bled. "You made your choice. You prioritized a stranger's fear over your mate's truth. You imprisoned loyalty and called it order. You are the alpha of the Silverfang pack, be that, but you are not my mate, not anymore." I placed a hand on my stomach. "This child is your heir. He or she will be born of my blood in my kingdom. They will know both worlds. That is the only bridge that remains between us." There was nothing more to say. I turned my back on them. On Andrew's shattered pride, on Stella's terrified relief, on the pack's bewildered fear. I walked toward the trees. The silent ones parted for me. As I passed, the large male inclined his head. "The covenant is sealed, Queen. The land rejoices." Together we moved into the deep green shadows. With every step, the sounds of the Silverfang pack faded, replaced by the ancient, welcoming song of the untamed wilds. The path ahead was not a cabin cage, but a forest throne. I was no longer Sienna, the Omega. I was Sienna, born a queen, come into her own, and my reign had just begun.